second that. We need a carbon tax. We need a carbon tax on consumption.
Sorry, Bill, did you want to respond? Oh, okay. There's some votes with the carbon tax. Okay, at the back there, please.
Oh, sorry, he's been waiting for a very long time.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would like to comment on the development path of the developing countries like India. I strongly agree that there should be equity. In the past, the developed countries have been burning so much fossil fuel to have their development, and now they should not hinder your development. But my question is that, is it necessary to burn fossil fuel for development? Actually, in the past, many countries, the developed countries in the world had gone through a one path. They have gone to a path that their economy and development is strongly dependent on fossil fuel. And my question, but I want to state that development is not necessarily equal to growth. The same applies to population growth and also the GDP growth. So although the Western country has more material, but is it really good to copy everything from it? We clear that GDP is a misleading figure because it has not take into account all those environmental destruction. But if we go on burning fossil fuel, although there's still space for negotiation of how much fossil fuel can be burned, but the Earth has no space for negotiation. The situation is quite emergency. So I have a point that it may not be necessary to trade off the environment for development. Only if we change our economy or development path. Actually, it's an opportunity for India to be a leader if you can develop an economy that is sustainable and do not rely on fossil fuel. It's very difficult for the developed countries like the US to do this because their existing economy is already here, and their mindset, things are difficult to change because there is inertia. And also, I would like to talk about the value. Actually, the drastic way to change value is by money or by crisis. But think about it, every child when they are born, including me, they have no value. All of their value comes from the society, the daily life, environment, and the system they are living on. Why can't the government take on the role as a leader to change the economic system or the development system so that it can, in the end, change their value? If in Africa there is no democratic system, then in the end, people will not have a value of democracy. So my last point is that if the India or developing countries are are already determined not to depend on fossil fuel in their future development, then maybe you can just sell the fossil fuel to the developed countries which is in the transition stage and they need the fossil fuel. You can get the capital for another kind of development. And in the end, I would like to raise a question. When we are going to develop in a new path, which is not like a traditional one, is it still necessary that we rely on the developed countries like the US to such a large extent? Thank you.
Maybe a brief response from Mr. Agrawal.
You asked so many questions and I have to give it briefly, so I'll be very, very brief. I agree with almost everything you said. I don't disagree with everything. I think the GDP is clearly not the same as development. I think Cormac made the point very eloquently. But we don't have any other metric. And it's a sad fact. By default, we use it. But GDP is clearly not equivalent to development. And perhaps we need to go and look at some other metrics and some other measures, such as what Bhutan has come up with, the gross happiness index, rather than the gross domestic product, you know. So there's huge scope for, sorry?
Promoted by Coca-Cola.
Oh, has it been promoted by Coca-Cola? I didn't know that. There you are. Every good idea, there's a bad person standing behind it. So there you are. What can you believe and not believe in next? So there falls another hero. So I agree with everything. I think you're right. You've got a point there. And it's far more difficult for advanced countries like the US to change their lifestyles than we in China and India would like to believe. We constantly castigate them, we constantly harangue them, we constantly accuse them. But it is very difficult. Let's put ourselves in their shoes. It's very difficult to give up what you have. It's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, as they say. It's easier to adopt best practices from the beginning, which is what India and China should be doing entirely out of self-interest. But the problem is, how do you define non-fuel technologies which are affordable, viable? Science and technology hasn't given us that. It goes to the point which was excellently made, that we should stop having conferences and meetings like this where we discuss how bad global warming and climate change is. We know that. Let's discuss tangible, practical, viable, specific solutions which countries like India and China can adapt, so they don't make the same mistakes as America, as Europe. I totally agree with you. But are those ideas out there? Not really. Are those best practices being transferred either through subsidy or through a global pool of money and technology, or through even voluntary sharing? I don't think so. I think we've heard some wonderful stories from Mongolia, a positive story from Mongolia, a not so positive story from China. These stories should be taken forth beyond these rooms to let other communities know what can be done and what perhaps should not be done. But I don't think there is maybe this is the message we should send to the United Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, that this is what needs to be done, but we don't have that sharing. Talking about fuel, can India go beyond fossil fuel? We'd love to. Any country would love to. It's very polluting. It's very dirty. It has huge health impact. I didn't even go in the figures specific to India, but every day about 500 people die of respiratory-related illness in India alone. I mean, that's a huge number. And this is all related to fossil fuel burning. But we'd love to. But India is 80% dependent on coal, more than China. 80%. And there is no other viable technology in place. Solar is very expensive. Nuclear has its own issues and problems. So, until we come to either there has to be some sort of a subsidy, some sort of, some cost. And I think carbon tax, I'm personally very strongly in favor of a carbon tax.
Thanks so much to our provocateurs. I'm afraid I have to be the bearer of bad news. We've run out of time. A few people here have to go to another session in 1 minute. So thank you again. Thank you also to the experts in the room, and thank you to all of you for coming.